I think you handled that very succinctly and with all the important components to it. There's a few cases of which I am familiar, and I don't want to put too much stock in it publicly right now. But let's just say I'm working on a few things, and I'm hoping before the next year is out, maybe even before the next few months are out, we can have some positive results in that. And I'm actively working with a law enforcement agency in that regard. And I would be glad to talk about that on Cold Red when the time comes. But in terms of any other one particular case, I don't have one on the top of my head. I think the ones you mentioned.
Jim, I know
I'll just throw this in there. I've been saying this in the last few years. There are some serial rapists.
Welcome to our 2025 year-end live show. I'm Ray Carr, and with me always is Fitz. Fitz, how are you tonight?
I'm doing okay since it's only you, Ray. I usually look forward to our guest being on board. So it's just me and you.
You're lucky tonight, right?
Well, you may consider it lucky, but actually it is. And our friendship goes back over a quarter century.
Yeah,
and
it does.
I'm glad we stay in touch now. Sometimes we see each other in person, but certainly on this podcast. And our audience, we want to thank you too as the Christmas season is upon us. Whether you celebrate Christmas, holidays, whatever you call it, thanks for bringing us into your life. And but we're not done with the season yet. We're going to talk a little bit about stuff that's been happening. And Ray, I'll throw it back to you. Any particular topic, or where do you want to start?
Well, I'm going to tell you what. We had a heck of a year here at the Cold Red Podcast. From the field to the front lines to the front page, Fitz and I have spent a year doing deep dives into cold cases, along with profiling 2025's biggest headlines on the podcast, and for various news outlets. We celebrated our 100th episode, which was a milestone for us, and we followed up on some active cold cases. Earlier this year, we had Natalie DiSabatino on the show to discuss her brother's unsolved murder and subsequent 10-year cold case. We're happy to report that there's been an arrest in her brother's case, and hopefully this brings some closure and justice for the DiSabatino family. We also did a deep dive with Chuck Boyle and Sylvester Schieber into the Center City rapist murder and crime spree in the 90s. We dissected some of the missteps of law enforcement, and you can listen to that, which is our entire season 7 that we went through that. We also recently had host on Mind Over Murder, which is a podcast in its own, and we discussed some of the updates on the victimology as it related to the Colonial Parkway murders. So we've been doing quite a bit here in the last year. I'm even surprised as I kind of go through this list of some of the things that we've done. But Jim, you more than I have been doing a lot of media rounds this year. And I know you asked me earlier, and I'll get back to what stood out to me, but what out of all these things that occurred, what stood out to you?
Oh boy. Well, I know it started with a bang and in no good way with New Year's Day when we had the car attack in New Orleans. And of course, the various mass shooters. And Ray, I know you go in the media too, but you don't go in the media to talk about happy things. And we don't even talk politics. I mean, we have, our viewpoints, but that's not what Cold Red's about. That's not what they invite us onto the different networks to do. I think the toughest one for me was in late August of this year when the Catholic school and church was attacked by the bizarre younger person who fits the norm of a lot of these shooters lately. And I'll never forget getting ready to go on Laura Ingraham's show at 7:00 Eastern time. They always have a little bit of an interview beforehand, little setup. And there was a young boy they interviewed about 10 years old. And he was there that day. It actually happened in a church. The killer came in, pointed in through some church windows and whatever. And this kid gave such an eloquent, salient, complete version of what happened that day. And I'm complimenting him on his communication style, but it's something no 10-year-old should ever have to do. And for the first time on the air, I found myself actually mad. And we and I have both been on live TV. You have hours in advance. You're doing some research in advance. The producer usually wants some talking points or points of view, whatever they call them. And I just threw some of those things out the window when I saw that kid being interviewed. And I knew I went to Catholic school. My kids did. Your kids did. Grandkids at Catholic schools. And this just hit home. And I really lashed out on the air, not at Laura or whatever, but at some parents and who could do this. How could they raise their kids this way? And that kid, the mother let him change his name when he was 17. Then we got the letters that he was writing or the journals he was keeping. And he said, yeah, I really regret smoking so much pot and maybe going through this whole trans thing. and we didn't know all that when I was on TV that night. That came out later. So if yeah, these things get depressing, and I know one of the questions from our audience, towards the end is, how do you guys handle this? And Ray, neither you nor I are out working cases anymore. We're not going to crime scenes, and we've both done that. That's really tough, notifying family members of things, but even just doing it in the media and trying to share with our audience on Cold Red, but certainly in other venues, here's what the police are doing, here's what law enforcement's doing, here's what the killer might be doing, or how they prepared for this. So, but if there's any one case that stuck out to me, it was watching that 10-year-old boy who's, you just know his life will never be the same. And of course, the young people who were killed that day, their lives ended that day, and their families' lives will never be the same. And why? Why is this even happening? Just like with Brown University, that's still fresh in our minds here. We can touch on that a little bit. I'll throw a question back at you, Ray. What one story or one incident really hit home for you, and not in a good way?
There's really two that kind of stick out in my mind. One was the Charlie Kirk assassination.
Of course.
And the thing that I thought, if anything good can come out of something good came out of that. And that was the outreach to Turning Point and what they've been able to do, and the amount of young people that have turned back to God because of that. I mean, to me, that's probably the most powerful thing that's really touched me this year, is the large scale of people that turned back to God because of what happened to Charlie Kirk. And they continue in droves to run in that direction. These young people are our future.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that that's really, really important in our future. And the other thing that I was kind of close to, because it was in my backyard, was the shooting of the 5 police officers in York County. I was asked to go on a couple news media shows and discuss my thoughts about that. And I remember, and I'm not going to mention the show, but they said to me, they don't really think, it didn't really look like they were prepared. And I kind of took that personal, because I know exactly what they were doing. Not being prepared would have been just one guy going to answer a domestic call to a situation where this individual had been known to the police officers. He's known to have been violent. He was known to have threatened this young woman and his child. And they sent 5 officers. What they weren't prepared for is this guy to have a submachine gun and open fire on him. Nobody's prepared for that. And even if they were prepared, they went in, hopefully. I'm going to tell you, what happened that night or that afternoon was that those police officers saved the life of that woman and her child and her mother. Because had she shown up instead of those police officers, it would have been her mother, her, and her young boy that would have lost their life. So, you always say it's the running into the fire, as you might call it. And that's exactly what these police officers did. I think about them quite often. And those are some of the things. And, there's a lot of things that happen. And I know you mentioned that 10-year-old boy. And that really bothered me too, Jim. And, because we have grandchildren that are close to that age. We had our own children. And our children didn't have to experience that. When you look at it, you heard of Columbine. That was back in the early 90s when some of our kids were going to school, but it wasn't as prominent as it is today. When you look at some of these things that are happening today, and believe it or not, active shooter cases are actually down in 2025 versus 2024. So, I mean, one is too many, but, you look at these things, and we'll talk about some of these things in more detail as we come along. But that's what kind of stood out to me this year.
Let's cut to the chase, Ray, about the Brown University shooting. And I reached out for you Thursday morning. Mm-hmm. And I'd been on national media every night that week, and I was getting a little frustrated. And I was on at least with one person, and he was, pretty heavily criticizing the police. And I was polite and respectful. I said, I'm going to give the police some leeway. I think that's the exact word I used. I said, the investigators on the ground, I'm hoping they're doing the job. They're having the outside help. I'm hoping the politicians aren't getting in the way, even if they don't like who's in charge in Washington or somewhere else. And I was hoping and praying that that wasn't the case. But eventually, it looks like good old-fashioned gumshoe work and opportunity and preparation all came along at the same time, and they helped put that case together. Brown University with an $8 billion endowment, you really have to wonder why, they didn't have cameras there. And who knows if the cameras would have actually stopped the guy from shooting. But you know what? He could have been identified sooner, and maybe the MIT professor up in Massachusetts would still be alive. And I mean, there's a lot of, possibilities and what ifs. I understand that. But anyway, I woke up Thursday morning and I reached out for you and we talked on the phone. I said, Ray, no one's released a profile on this. And we've worked these cases before in the Bureau, and we've certainly, and I retired before you. I know you worked some cases even after I retired, and even in the private sector, we were helping out. I said, Ray, let's put something together here. Let's make it more for the public than for law enforcement. Between the two of us, we came up with a 2-page, actually a little over 2-page document that, no one asked us, but the Behavioral Analysis Unit didn't put anything out. I'm not sure what level of cooperation was happening. And so finally you and I agreed, I was going on with Laura Ingraham on Thursday, and we said, let's send it to the producer and we can go over it, in real time. Now, what we didn't know, of course, is that everything was coming together by Thursday afternoon. The 4:00 press conference was put off, which was a clue something was happening. And by the time I got on the air, they did have me come on at 7, and actually they had me wait through the whole time. All we knew was there was a guy in a barricaded situation. I thought it was in a residence at first. I think that's what they told everybody. It turns out, of course, it was a storage unit somewhere. And of course, it turns out he was already dead, looks like for a day or two. But the only thing I said on the air that night to Laura, I mean, we actually covered this profile a little bit, but I said 2 things. Laura, I said, this person may be listening to us right now. So let's tell this person, whoever it is, we didn't have a name yet. I said, come out, hands up, make it easy for you, for the police. Of course, we didn't know he was dead, but I just felt compelled to put that out there. Everyone has a phone, of course. They can check into these news stations, and we wanted to make sure that was clear. And then, and the second point I wanted to make, but right. But yeah, and then let me jump in with
you. Go ahead. I don't know if you agree with this or not, but I think it's really important for people to stay in their lanes. And what I'm talking about, and I've seen this start happening more and more, where politicians get involved in an investigation. They have no right to be involved in the investigation. And I didn't say that when I was on the Jesse Waters or any other show. I didn't mention that. But that really bothered me because I kept seeing the police chief look for approval in everything he was saying. And the police chief even made a statement and was confronted by the AG. Hey, that's the wrong term to use on a couple things. And you have to let law enforcement do their job. And I think when politicians get involved, they're getting involved for the wrong reason. They have no expertise in what's going on out in the field. And all they do is clutter. And you know what else I've seen that, and Jim, I don't know if you agree with this, but I've seen occur over the last several years is the lack of transparency between law enforcement and the community. Jimmy Gagliano, who, I know he's from New York. He said that one of the main ways this case, the Brown case, would be solved will be through crowdsourcing. But how do you crowdsource something without information? And that's why you and I put together that profile. It was not meant for law enforcement. And I'm sure the BAU has talked to law enforcement and says, hey, this is the type of guy you're looking for. And these are some of his behavioral markers. But the thing is that law enforcement has they don't have the whole lens. They can't see the whole picture. And I'm telling you right now, in my 26-year career in the FBI, and I know you've been around a long time too, Jim, both in the FBI and local law enforcement, you don't solve cases without the help of the public. You just don't do it. I mean, I don't care how good you are, you need the public. So why aren't we using them more?
And the second point I made with Laura and to our audience now, it's not that big of a deal, but once it was confirmed, and that's something else, our own former FBI said halfway through last week that the MIT shooting is not related. It was pretty definitive, and we took that apart. Mm-hmm. So that didn't play into our initial profile. although it eventually came back into it. But the other part was once we confirmed that this MIT professor was killed by the same guy, he wasn't just a mass murderer anymore, meaning the shooter. He was a serial killer. And by definition, one murder, another murder with a cooling down period in between. Not a legal term necessarily, but just for people out there. But yeah, I agree with you, and you do need community involvement. And I'm the first person to say, of course, to the police, they don't have to put everything out all the time. They could come up with a car and a tag, or color, something like that, and they don't have to put that out. Let them try to find it first. Now with these tag recognition software, it's a lot they can do with that. Not to mention facial recognition software too. But let's go over just a few bullet points. We broke this into 3 categories. Our profile that we never actually put on Cold Red. We were going to that night. Remember, Ray, we're going to do a special episode right before Laura's show, but they kept putting the press conference off. And between the 2 of us and our Robertson, Matt McLaughlin, our producers, we go, let's hold off. There's no reason putting this out. Then they come out in the press conference and say they caught this person, that person. We broke the profile into 3 categories: physical description / possible anomalies. Come back to that. Pre-offense behavior, and number 3, post-offense behavior. And Ray, you've helped me write other profiles in the day, and I've helped you. This is basically maybe not the physical description part, but it's almost always pre-offense behavior, post-offense behavior are the primary 2 components of it. The only reason I put a few bullet points up front, this was it turns out an odd person. And Brown University, it's a very left-leaning university, and I don't care about that myself personally. But when a Republican woman, vice president of the Republican club, happens to be the one that's murdered, you have to look at that, and you just can't rule that out as a being a possible correlation there. So all I wanted to say to everyone up front, I'm not relying too much on the physical description. Now, we had videos. Was it a man? Was it a woman? The last few shootings have been trans people, mass shootings. The one I just talked about, school in Minneapolis. Of course, going back to Nashville. Charlie Kirk's assassin was certainly in that arena. So I just said, we're going to focus on behavioral stuff. I don't know the gender. I don't know the exact age. And maybe there's even some disguise involved. Of course, the mask was a disguise all the time. But here's what really counted, and I didn't really get into that with Laurie the night, and that would have been a second. That's almost like for the audience, or I should say the public, don't worry about that as much. Concern yourself with what we're about to discuss now, and that's pre-offense behavior. And I'll just do the short versions here. The shooter will have direct or indirect knowledge of Brown University. He did, went to school there 25 years ago. And I continued, it could be from very recent times or years in the past. This would include living there, working there, and taking classes there. And that's exactly, so it goes back 25 years, even a little bit less than that. I think 2003 he quit, but then he's been in town, it seems, for a few weeks. So we actually had long-term and short-term with this guy. Number 2 bullet point, and Ray, of course, you helped me put this together. The shooter knew of the classroom where the shootings occurred. He cased the location hours, days, or even weeks before. You can say 25 years ago, he kind of cased the place, and he knew its design and construction. And there may have been some rehearsal on his part the week before or a few days before. So, he took classes right in that same building, and that was a representational target. This is not in the profile, but that's something like whether he may or may not have been looking for a certain student, but that room represented something to him, a failure. Any comments on those first 2 so far, Ray?
Jim, I think so our audience has an idea. We're really talking about targeted violence. And what we mean by targeted violence is either he was targeting an individual or maybe just an institution. And maybe in that institution, one building, one room that was symbolic to him in some way. And when you look as you move forward, not only was he targeting an institution, and I don't know if Jim, I don't think anybody was specifically selected in that room. I think they were just collateral damage. He was going to go in and make a statement there. At least that's my thought. But I think in the second episode with the MIT professor, I think that individual was
definitely targeted.
Absolutely targeted. So without more information, and maybe more of that will come out if we look at and we do some victimology on the offender from the offender standpoint, and we look at some of that, I think we'll find out more and more about him and what some of his, because we still really don't know what his motivation, other than the fact that he had a grievance. We know that all these things start out with a grievance and they move to an ideation. And there's research that even though he's familiar, he's still doing research because it's been 25 years. And then it goes from a research, it goes to planning, it goes to the breach of the situation, then to the attack phase, which is what we experienced last weekend. So, I mean, and the funny thing about this, and I was going to say this on Jesse, but I didn't, said most of these situations, and I know you'll agree with me, usually wind up with suicide by cop or just suicide, and what we have, and we didn't put that in our profile, but what happened was exactly that. It turned out to be a suicide.
Yeah, and you know this as well as hopefully other profilers. You don't want to put that, even a suggestion of suicide or suicide by cop, out there. And because assuming any words like this we're putting out, not now, it's after the fact, but in real time, that this person could be listening to. Yes, just getting to the bullet points here. The shooter has an interest in firearms, whether long-term or short-term. He had at least 2 of them. The shooter's demeanor will have changed in the last week or so, maybe a few months, prior to the December 13th incident. It may have been dramatic or possibly more subtle. But those who know him will have noticed these behavioral changes. They simply weren't themselves in varied ways. Now, we don't know how close this person was to anybody else. He was residing in Florida up until, I think, October. But I have a feeling they would have noticed some changes in this guy, certainly before he took off. Well, we don't know if he's a true loner or not. The Kaczynski type living in a cabin. Obviously, this wasn't him. He was in some kind of residential area in southern Florida. But if people were near him, they would have noticed these types of demeanor attributes to him. This is a big one. The shooter has expressed anger, frustration, or intolerance for certain institutions, people, and or ideologies in recent times. So this is what we call leakage. And Ray, you're very familiar with that somehow this seeps out. You could have arguments with someone, create hypotheticals with someone, but that's somehow, if they are talking to someone, anyone, even peripheral people in their lives, they get in a casual conversation with them, this kind of stuff is going to come out because there's only so much people can hold inside of them even before they take the action that you described when it's actually carried out. And it will just manifest somehow beforehand. I threw this in. I don't know if Charlie Kirk's assassination in September had anything to do with this guy, whether his politics fell in there. He just may have seen, hey, someone killed on campus, and look at all the news that it's getting, and that was University of Utah, or boy, I hate Brown University. Maybe I should do the same thing at the Brown campus. And it took him, 2.5 or so, 3 months to do it, but he followed through and did it. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's any writings or anything of his involved that somehow some catalyst, some stressor occurred on or about the time that Charlie Kirk was killed. I'm not saying he was a supporter of him, liked him, disliked him. He may have been neutral, but just saying, whoa, an assassination on a campus. Yeah, I can do that too. And while I'm at it, I'll take out that damn, rival of mine from back in Portugal in the mid-90s, meaning, of course, this brilliant MIT professor. As you already
Jim,
said, go ahead.
I just want to go back to something you said early on when you said, it's important for law enforcement to understand that this individual could be listening to everything that's being stated, everything that's being written. He's watching the news, whether it's on his phone, how those things come through. And I think he probably felt everything closing in on him. And he decided, hey, look, I'm not going to go to prison. I won't survive in prison. And he decided to take his own life. I think he was a little premature in that. He didn't give himself enough time, but he knew it was just a matter of time before they found him. He knew that. He knew that homeless man that was, for whatever reason, sleeping in the basement of that same building.
That's a whole other story.
That's a whole other story. We're not going to even talk about that. How does that even occur without anybody doing anything about that? Where's security or the police department on Brown University? Why are they not dealing with that? But, he's the one that really helped kind of kick this thing off and
Sure.
point them in the right direction, which I think was a good thing.
One person may have been the target, the other's collateral damage. You kind of said that. Mm-hmm. No doubt he was online often, even more so recently, even just with his phone. And I said he was out of pocket, and that's an FBI term. Ray, you and I know what that means. But he was He was not doing his regular thing, not living where he normally lives. And remember, this is, if you're just joining us now, folks, we're not just summarizing what we know. This is what Ray and I put together Thursday morning, fine-tuned it Thursday afternoon, sent it off to Laura Ingram's people, and I went into some of this on Thursday night on the air while the guy was allegedly, in a barricaded situation. So we knew this person would be out of pocket, meaning not around their usual locations. Certainly this past Friday, Saturday, or Sunday. He called out sick from work, something like that. Well, we were certainly in the right church there, but the pew, it was a big church, and he was out of pocket since October. If anyone did know anything about his life, they would say, oh, this guy happens to be missing. And that's when we were hoping that everybody else would see the above bullet points we've already referenced and take it from there. So that's it for pre-offense behavior. Ray, anything else in there for you to summarize?
No, Jim, I think you covered it pretty well, what we kind of put together.
So for post-offense, what we're telling people now to look for behaviors on this person's part since the shooting. And again, we weren't clear whether the MIT case was involved or not. In fact, we were told it was not related. Remember when I first heard it? Boy, another professor, or I should say another academic killed 50 miles away, 48 hours later, give or take. I said, coincidence? Maybe, but they're saying, no, not related. And that kind of bothered me, but I said, all right, ballistics are off. DNA is different. Whatever they do have, maybe they have a description or video, better video up there, and it's a complete different person. But that just didn't seem. And I'm waiting to hear his victimology. Oh, was he whatever? He's a brilliant professor, married with several kids. But did he have some shady lifestyle going or having an affair with someone? He wasn't. But that could have certainly contributed to a death like that. So post-offense behavior. They're still missing from their usual locations. They are presently fixated on the Brown case, and I would add now the MIT case. They would watch, as you said earlier, read any news, newspapers, phone, tablets, TVs, anywhere they could get it. They want to know what the police know. The shooter may have leaked, even after the incidents, elements of it, even if directly, even by asking people about it. They no doubt mentioned it to someone somewhere in a recent past, in person or in social media. I'm not sure about this with this guy. He may have been so closed off, he may have been so insular, that he just had no one to talk to, perhaps, which of course could have been part of his problem. A few other points here. Few, if any, other people have direct contact with this person right now. For the first few days, he would have been hunkered down somewhere, possibly destroying potential evidence. Maybe he didn't destroy evidence, but he was pulling out his SIM card. He had a phone that couldn't be tracked. He was changing tags on the back of a car. Really made it difficult for law enforcement. And, possibly later he would come out from hiding. He may have to, but this guy, of course, never did. He took himself out there. So I just ended this with, and Ray, I know you know this, no profile is perfect. Several of the above characteristics / behaviors may not necessarily apply directly to the Brown U shooter, but if the majority of the features are consistent with a certain individual, the FBI should be notified. So this was our purpose in putting out this profile. And Ray, being humble here, it wasn't perfect. No profile ever is. But I think we pretty much described this person. I wish I could have said late 40s, from Portugal. But there's just no way we could have known the exact age. He did look older than the ages they were putting out at first. But I was still hesitant to go into any further description. Just let people look at the video and determine what they want there. But and of course, he yelled something, and almost every media hit I did last week, even if I wasn't asked the question, I just said before they cut me off, I said, and what did this guy say? There's, dozens and dozens of witnesses in this room. People are saying he said something. And was it in English, in another language, something easily recognizable, not easily recognizable? And that went back and forth all week. And that really bothered me because there is such a thing as ear witness evidence. And that can be used to track someone. Did he yell something in Portuguese? It'll be interesting if someone said, well, it sounded like Spanish, and Spanish and Portuguese are sort of related. And that could have been, okay, well, maybe we have a native Spanish speaker or Portuguese speaker, conceivably. But it just would have helped a little bit narrow down the suspect pool. To this day, nothing's ever been released. Wasn't sure. I trusted the police on the ground. I wasn't sure I trusted 100% the administration of Brown, who wanted to defund the police, cut back the manpower, take cameras out of a building. I heard somewhere there was an op-ed written in 2021 that there were too many cameras on certain parts of campuses, and the school removed them. I need that to be verified, but quite frankly, it wouldn't surprise me. And I think some people did complain that their rights were being violated. And I said on the air with someone, I lose track of whose show, but I don't like cameras everywhere either. No one likes. Not that I'm doing anything wrong, and I know most of the time, Ray, you're not. So that's a joke. But yeah, you don't. But I know you go to the UK and you're on camera virtually every square inch that you're outside. So anyway, I think nowadays with the world in which we live, we kind of have to give up that privacy and have visual images of just about every space in which we occupy.
Jim, I'm going to say that I think that the profile you and I put together was pretty close based upon the limited information that we had.
Right. We're outsiders.
Right. Had we had the information that the police had, it might have been it might have been a lot better than what it was. And I'm not saying that all the things we mentioned, the FBI was already mentioning the same things because their training is the same as yours and mine. I mean, it's not much different. But when you look at this type of attacker, and he's attacking students. So you usually look at the attacker is going to be in close assimilation to the age of the individuals he or she is attacking. Right. But then
maybe a little bit older sometimes.
Maybe a little bit older. Yes, correct. And then you have, on the other end, you have this professor who you and I both said, geez, it seems really strange that this is related. But they're saying absolutely not in the beginning when they should have just said, we don't know, the investigation is ongoing. Don't put out definitives. And there was a lot of things that were shared that came back. A lot of incorrect information went out by law enforcement early on. I thought there were too many. Press conferences where you were just throwing all this information. It was the same thing. It felt like Groundhog Day. I thought the whole thing could have been handled better. I mean, eventually, I'm talking about the press conferences. The guys outside doing the job, they're the best. Those are the guys that solve these things, not the politicians and these people at the press conferences. They're not. I mean, that's just a crawl on my gut here with these people. I mean, stay in your lane. What the heck is the mayor doing talking about the investigation? And, he comes up and makes a statement. I'm tired. I'm going to go out for pizza. I've been working 47 hours. Give me a break. I mean, come on. Those are the things that piss me off.
Especially when we know they're not supportive of their own police department or the
Correct.
Brown University Police Department in the past. Of course,
Correct.
they have to make themselves are now. The same with the president. Didn't even know what kind of a room, the next day, she didn't even know what kind of a room things were happening in. Anyway, I guess we've kind of covered this. There's no more.
We have.
A full-scale investigation will take place. There's certainly a psychological autopsy being undertaken right now of the shooter. And again, he's truly the bad guy here. Sometimes we lose track. He's truly the bad guy here. He's the killer. And he's where he belongs now. And no doubt about that. Took the coward way out.
Yeah.
So a strange person will find out what kind of psychological issues, drug, alcohol, going back to his early days. But it'll be very important. There's an interesting interview with a present-day Syracuse University professor I saw earlier today. He went to school with this guy at Brown, and he said he was very testy and very, short-tempered, and he complained about everything on the campus, the food, the teaching. He claimed he was smarter than everyone. Reminded me a little bit of Sheldon on Big Bang, except Sheldon would never hurt anyone,
Right.
being so smart, allegedly, that he knew all this stuff. But he somehow flunked out of Brown or didn't do the work that was required, and it cost him there. So I did compare him today. There are some indicators, like Kaczynski. He's a genius. He was, and he certainly, reading his journal years later, he would complain about some of his professors. He knows he knew more than them, but at least at that stage in his life, he was angry. He was frustrated back then, having read his autobiography and his journals and diary. But he, of course, didn't act out until much later after he was a professor and started bombing people. So, yeah, tough case. I feel for the family. And let's just hope lessons learned and we can avoid anything like this in the future.
I agree. Jim, I'd like to jump in. We have some audience questions here. I like to take the last 15, 20 minutes to talk about some of the audience questions. Here's one from Justin in Escondido, California. He says, do you think The trial by social media phenomenon makes it more difficult for law enforcement to do their jobs without bias. You want to take the first shot at that, Jim?
If you're a professional law enforcement officer with experience and you've been trained well, and you're not going to let bias get in your way of an investigation. Are you 100% immune from it? Not necessarily. But we have this thing called the Constitution, and the federal level, there's state constitutions, and every jurisdiction has its rules and regs. I mean, you know what it takes to undertake a criminal investigation. And there are more and more people out there with podcasts and platforms of some sort on social media. I'm not sure if I was an investigator today, if I would be reading them or purposely not reading them. Obviously, in the Brown case, I think it was the homeless guy. How many homeless people have phones, by the way? I'm a little confused about that. But he put something on Reddit about a Nissan, a car, check it out. And it turns out to have been accurate. And they finally, that's one of the things I even said, I was with Jesse Waters Wednesday night, I think. So look, James, calls me James. That's fine. I get along with Jesse. They're putting this picture up, this other guy here. Does that mean they even know what they're doing? He said, well, yeah, they have someone else in the proximity. And I said, they want to talk to him. Maybe he saw this shooter get into a car. And it so happens that's exactly what happened. So, right. And that's fine. So I don't think bias truly kicks in. And I think the trial, however the question was worded, if it actually goes to a trial, that's when sometimes the people in the community could have some level of bias. The non-law enforcement people, the non-investigators, they could have been reading media or listening to it all along about this person's guilty, he's not guilty, he's handsome, he shouldn't be charged or convicted. I'm talking about the CEO killer from last year. That's where sometimes bias kicks in. Professional law enforcement officers I've worked with, and I certainly know to this day, bias will not influence them in how they handle a case. Do you?
I agree with you, Jim, but I think it exists. So I'm going to say, I'm going to say the trial by social media makes it more difficult for law enforcement to do their jobs. I mean, look, social media rapidly frames a narrative before the facts are fully known. It's been known to happen that way. And when you look at it and think about the Floyd case and some of the things that happened in the Floyd case, people come out and they label it obvious or they label it racist or they say it's corrupt or there's a cover up. It's going to create pressure. And although you say, I'm not going to read it, it's very difficult to ignore it because everybody's talking about it on the squad. Everybody's talking about it in the precinct, no matter where you are. I mean, all these things are going on. The bottom line here, I think, is trial by social media does not just introduce bias, it incentivizes it. I really think it does. It pushes law enforcement away from doing what they do best, and that's making sound decisions based on evidence. They have to maintain blinders on. You can't, look, they always say justice is blind, but the challenge going forward is, sometimes will these people withstand the public pressure? Will they do it? I mean, you're right. A lot of the people you and I know, Jim, would in a heartbeat. But, I tell you what, it's you have this bias. It not just affects police officers, it affects prosecutors, it affects judges, and it can affect a jury. I think that really can have an impact.
And Ray, we're on the same page. I think the question, how I heard it, focused on investigators, law enforcement. True professionals will do their best to work around that. But they have bosses that are, like we talked in the Brown case, mayors and governors and DAs who run for election. Can they take that bias and all that chatter on the street, social media, and then try to influence their investigators? Absolutely. And that's when, the people with the strong backbones know how to stand up, say, thank you, sir. We're going to do it our way, or thank you, sir. I'll do it your way, but actually do it the way to get the case solved. So it is a factor. It will affect some people. It's not going away. We have First Amendment, of course.
Correct.
And the internet has changed everything in our world, in our collective worlds. So everyone nowadays has to be prepared for that, not to let it get in the way of their cases, at least minimizing it to the best of their ability.
Here's another question that came from Sarah from Minnesota. This is directed towards you, Fitz. She says, Fitz, was there a specific manifesto, a note, or social media post where the language used was a smoking gun for you? That's a loaded question. No pun intended.
You intended that pun, Ray. I know it. Well, of course, we've been through Unabomb, and you can't eat your cake and have it too, etc. The one, it's a case that didn't make a whole lot of publicity. It was out of, I think, Bibb County, Alabama. And yeah, it's in my book. I covered in my A Journey to Center of the Mind, book 4. Still some giveaways out there, folks. Like and subscribe and make a comment, and we'll get some books out your way, including for the audio book too in the U.S. So yeah, he used the term light bug to mean a light bulb. And we had somebody wore a hidden microphone or tape recorder. He also used the term light bug to mean a light bulb, although he wasn't describing the murder scene. And I always felt that was one of the best cases I've had where truly unique language was involved and I could help build their case. And this guy was saying all along, I didn't kill my wife. I don't think I even said what the crime was. He was accused of killing his wife, and he was a suspect, but they couldn't prove it at first. So the term light bug in his written poemic that he sent to the police anonymously, and then he picked up on a wire that his buddy wore helping the police, that put it together. And if you watch his show called, the show is Criminal Minds, and the episode is called Gabby. And they borrowed that term from me, light bug, for Garcia to find and help them solve their case. So yeah, for some reason with that question, there's been other ones, of course, the black vernacular English that I picked up in the writings of the DC sniper. I was the first one that said, this may be a black sniper, first time. Turns out it was 2 of them. And, it was dialects all over the U.S., New England, Deep South, Philly, of course, Ray, as you and I know, and other parts of the country. And blacks have some distinctive features when they speak and write. And I was one of the first ones to point out, the first one, based on the letters alone, saying, I think everyone thought the sniper would be white. I think it's a black guy. And something else in the tarot card said it may be 2 people. So there's a few different examples of language, and there's others, but they're in my book, quite frankly, a few of them, that including the word anti-free, meaning the stuff you put in your car radiator to keep it from freezing, not anti-freeze. That helps solve a case. Again, it's in my book 4. So there's just 3 cases off. And of course, Unabomb's the granddaddy of them all, but other ones not as well known, there's some words for you. Good question.
Here's another one from Violet from Orlando, Florida. She wants to know if you or I, if there's one cold case that's on our radar that we think is finally on the verge of being solved. I'll run with this first, if you don't mind, Fitz. I'm a little cautious about saying any one cold case is definitely on the verge of being solved. I think that there's a few that are generally feel like they're closer than ever before. And that's largely because of the advances in forensic science, forensic genealogy, digital forensics. If I had to name one category rather than a single case, it would be long dormant homicide cases where they preserve biological evidence. And investigators are now re-examining it with modern DNA technology. I think that when they do that, it helps them move it from a frozen, cold, to active without a whole lot of public fanfare, at least until the arrest is suddenly made. But I guess I didn't answer your question, so I'm going to take a shot here, and I don't know if you agree with this, but I think if I had to choose one case, it's kind of a one that's well known by everybody. I think it has some momentum, and that's the Zodiac Killer investigation. Not because of its factual claims, but there's multiple independent teams. There's a lot of people looking at this, and they have narrowed their suspects down. Previously dismissed evidence, I think the letters, the ciphers, the partial prints, they're all being re-examined. And I think that law enforcement agencies appear more open to revisiting conclusions that they once thought were closed. And I think that may help them. So, that's my take on that question there, Jim.
I think you handled that very succinctly and with all the important components to it. There's a few cases of which I am familiar, and I don't want to put too much stock in it publicly right now. But let's just say I'm working on a few things, and I'm hoping before the next year is out, maybe even before the next few months are out, we can have some positive results in that. And I'm actively working with a law enforcement agency in that regard. And I would be glad to talk about that on Cold Red when the time comes. But in terms of any other one particular case, I don't have one on the top of my head. I think the ones you mentioned. I'll just throw this in there. I've been saying this in the last few years. There are some serial rapists and serial killers out there right now in their 60s and 70s that are pretty nervous. And they're waiting for a knock on the door any day of the week because they know what they did in the 1960s, 1970s, 80s, whenever. And so I will dedicate this question to all you guys out there. You probably don't listen to Cold Red, or maybe you do. because you want to make sure you're not going to get caught for the crimes you committed back then. But there are a lot of people that this genealogical DNA and all the other factors of it, it's only a matter of time before a lot of people are going to be identified, and we'll see if they're still alive or in fact, maybe deceased or in prison for something else. But they will get solved.
Real quick salient point here is the real key here is the preservation of biological and physical evidence in those cold cases. The better preserved that information or that evidence is, the better chance they have at solving it today with today's technology. So my thing to law enforcement is always do your very best in any criminal case, because even if it's not solved, there's always advances coming in forensics that may one day solve it based on what you did 10, 20, 30 years ago. Always remember that. The last question here, Jim, is, and we talked about this earlier in the podcast, is mental health wellness was discussed several times this year. How do you personally decompress after, or how did you personally decompress after a particular heavy investigation? You go ahead first, and then I'll follow you with my answer.
I think I used to kid people back in the 90s when I first went to the profiling unit. I'm looking at grisly photos or videos or occasionally on crime scenes, weekly. But I would go home and watch MTV Beach House, or there was some show like that. It was just silly and just a bunch of these goofy people in a beach house somewhere. And I don't think I ever actually did watch it. And not the Jersey Shore
I
show.
thought it
That
was the Brady Bunch, Jeff.
No, it wasn't the Brady Bunch either. But no, I wrote this in my second book and then again in my third book. When I was a Ben Salem police officer, I could walk back and forth to the station. Actually, for a couple of years, I rode my bike when I was in plain clothes, or at least just have a regular jacket on. Anyway, there was always one red light. I said, when I pass that red light, whether I stop or go, that's when work, if I'm coming home, that's when work gets left behind and family stuff picks up. When I was in New York, I think it was exit 7A of the New Jersey Turnpike, driving back and forth to Ben Salem, Pennsylvania, and that was about 90 minutes into the trip. I still had 30 minutes to go to get home, and that's when I stopped thinking of cases I worked and started thinking of, what am I doing with the kids tonight? Is that my coaching tonight, or taking them to Boy Scout, whatever it may be, or something else? And that made a big so just having a physical barrier that just shut my brain down, and I rarely watched law enforcement type shows for the 31 years I was on the job, either as a cop or FBI agent. I said, I live this stuff. I don't need to watch it on TV. Every once in a while now, if it's well done show, I started watching Blue Bloods. Have you watched that? Right?
I have, yeah.
And I want to get more into it. I've only watched the first few episodes, so I'm not endorsing any shows, but that's a well done show. On a personal level. Some people bring things home, others don't, and it's the best, especially if your whole family's in law enforcement. That would be trickier. So that was my key. Just walk in that door or a milepost beforehand. Purposely erase your brain of what you experienced in work. Don't share it with loved ones, family, friends, and then and everyone will be much healthier for it.
Jim, I echo a lot of things you just said. I mean, to me, decompression isn't intentional. It's not something I leave to chance. I usually focus on three things. The first thing is a physical reset with me. And the thing is, in the FBI, and I was never a police officer, but I was just an agent for 26 years. But when you're working investigative work, you're in this constant threat response mode. And so movement is essential. I'm always doing things. So to me, one of the biggest things was going to the gym. That would help reset me. When I go to the gym, any frustration I would have, and I went every day, and even on the weekends, I would usually take Sunday off, but going to the gym. The other, as you mentioned, is kind of like I distance myself from what's going on. And the kids used to say, and even my wife, I never discussed what I did at work. I never talked about things I did at work. I would just, when I got to a point, like you said, when I got home, I did the Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, and I became dad, I became husband. I was no longer an FBI agent. I was just their dad, helping with homework, coaching, doing all those things. I stepped away from it. What happened in my career is it started with pagers and then it went to cell phones, and it became more difficult to step away. So because every time I'd sit down and watch a show with my wife, the phone would ring, the pager would go off. I'm answering it, I'm back out the door. So it's hard. And I think The third thing that I think is the most important thing is I like to call it human grounding. And what I mean by that is spend time with people who aren't connected to work. And I did that.
Oh, yeah.
I did that with all my children's other, friends' parents. And it allowed me, we talked about humor. And when people, I didn't talk much about them. They were always interested in what I was doing. And I always said, you know what? I don't want to talk about that. Let's talk about the kids. So I think it's important that if we're looking at effective investigators, don't wait till you're overwhelmed to decompress. You got to build those practices into your routine. They got to be part of what you do every day. It can't wait till you get to that point and then all of a sudden think, I'm going to come back down. I can't do that. And I hope that leadership models that behavior, which gives them the permission to do the same thing. Okay? Because when you do that, it's going to lead to you making better decisions, better judgment, and it's going to keep you healthy from a well-being standpoint. That's my take on that, Jim.
Yeah, an excellent point. I would go to the gym too, and my thing was swimming, and there's no interruptions when you're swimming. You don't have headsets on. You're not hearing music, or, maybe you will.
What about the mermaids you used to see when you were swimming?
Well, no, Ray, it was you with unicorns, and you're conflating the two. And I only told you about a mermaid once, but she swam by me in a tank in a bar in Florida. That and so you just had, and you're right. And I've told, whenever I was even a cop as a sergeant, at roll call, we just have some conversations to say, watch for this stolen car here and bank robbery, this morning. But, sometimes it'd be a little less, specific. And I'd say just a bit of advice, especially you rookies, have some normal friends, quote unquote. Of course, police and law enforcement are normal too, but I said it kind of as a joke. And, the buddies you grew up with, they know who you really are. They don't just see you with a badge and a gun, mm-hmm. and see you, how you treat people on the streets, which may all be positive. But I said, just keep in touch with people who are not in law enforcement. And that really goes a long way and helps keep you settled. And these issues of how do you cleanse your brain or your mental palate from some of the bad stuff you've seen at work, that's a good way to do it. Deal with at least some people in your life that aren't in law enforcement, and they don't want to hear about what you saw at work, and you don't have to share it. You can focus on other things. So all good points there. Interesting closing to our season 8, Ray.
It really is, Jim. It's been a great year. I want to thank all our fans that have listened to us and stuck with us. I love your questions. Keep them coming. If there's something that you want us to dive into a little bit more, let us know. We're all ears to be able to do that.
I have a sort of a secretive shout out. There's a brother and sister I know both in the military. At least one is overseas, the other one's not, but I know their mom. I probably shouldn't put their names out there, but these are true heroes serving our country as officers. They listen to Code Red, they subscribe and follow, and I know they know who they are. So you, brother and sister, serving our country, stay well, stay safe, and enjoy the $1,700 and $1,776 bonus that President Trump awarded you last week. Well deserved. A lot more, of course. But thank you for your service and everyone else out there. We're lucky to be home, Ray, for Christmas, but a lot of people are not. And law enforcement will be working Christmas Day when you're opening presents. They'll be out there, certainly Christmas Eve. And people in the military are in faraway lands, some of them dangerous lands. We lost 2 National Guardsmen from Iowa National Guard a few weeks ago in Syria, and then the whole thing on Bondi Beach. We could maybe discuss some of that. Our friend Chris Illingsworth had some interesting comments about that, the Australian police officer we had on a year or two ago. Maybe we'll bring her back on in our next season to discuss that. But folks,
Jim, before
Ray, final words.
I want to give a shout out to one of my old college teammates, Don Holtz, who just became a new subscriber. And I want to give a shout out to the gentleman at Kutztown University football team. My old team that I played on many, many years ago, they made it to the Division II semifinals, where they lost to Harding. But they were 14-1, but they had a fantastic season. Congratulations to you guys, and I wish you much success in the coming year.
And unlike Ray, make sure you play with your helmet on. And why don't we leave it at that?
We will.
Folks, again, all seriousness, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. We will see you in 2026. doing bigger and better things on Cold Red. So enjoy this holiday season. Whatever you celebrate, Hanukkah, whatever celebration it may be, enjoy it. And like and subscribe to Cold Red. Check out the coldredpodcast.com. And I want to thank our two producers, Matt Robinson, Matt McLaughlin, our music coordinator, Rick Schilling, and everyone else involved in the show. And folks, stay well, and we'll see you next year, but only a few weeks away. Thanks again, everyone. See you next time on Cold Red.